My name's Phil Holland. I'm a SAS consultant and programmer working for Holland Numerics Limited. I've been working with SAS software since 1981 and graphics for a little bit less than that, and graphics template language since it came out in SAS 9.1, but a lot more recently. The versions in 9.2 are much better for producing graphs. A lot more features than the original version. Okay, thank you. Right, first of all, this is a new way of producing templates. You may have seen sort of the hard writing method where you have a blank piece of paper and you start typing. You can also produce the ODS template code from the SG procedures. This is actually doing it from a graphical perspective. So instead of producing a template by typing, you actually produce it by drag and drop from a selection of items that you can pull together. In the past, I've had a reputation in my presentations of always writing a little bit of code. I'll tell you where to look very carefully. There is one little bit of code that I've actually typed here. The rest is all generated by the ODS graphics designer. So we're going to go through two different routes of producing a template. First of all, to use a gallery, and these are pre-built templates that you can then manipulate to your particular specifications. And then secondly, I'm going to produce a template from a blank graph, so we can do pretty much anything we want in there. And then showing you how to save it as a designer file, which effectively is one of these gallery templates, or to actually save the template as a SAS program, which you can then edit as you wish. Okay, next slide. So ODS Graphics Designer was pre-production in SAS 9.2 maintenance 2, and then it became production in the very next maintenance level, where it added skins, which I'm not going to show you here, but just makes the individual items stand out on a bubble. I don't like it. I'm sorry. So I prefer it where you can see what you've got, and when you select it, it's not going concave or convex, it just highlights it. It's a GUI interface for building ODS templates for graphs. It's probably similar in design to the Enterprise Guide tasks, where it's drag and drop, and you can select information based on drop downs, and so you don't actually have to type anything at all. It's a Java 1.5 application which is compatible with Windows, Unix and Linux, and it will build a basic ODS template for most types of graph, remembering of course that it is a basic template and you may need to go in afterwards and edit it to add dynamic values, but that should be fairly straightforward. Most of the hard work of what it looks like will be built for you. Okay, next please. So when you open it up, what you have to do is run a particular program, and now it's not very clear on this graph, but it actually says %sg design. I've actually put a semicolon on the end, which isn't necessary because it's a macro call, and that is the only code you'll need to write throughout the whole of this until you get the template out the other end, and then it's an editing job. You run that and then it pulls in a Java application which looks like that. So what you have on the left hand side are various elements, as they're called, that you can put into a graph. On the right hand side it's showing the gallery by default, and you may have a particular graph that you're looking to produce which looks fairly similar to the one that's there. And there are several sections. I mean, these are the basic ones, but there are grouped. There are there's custom, which is when we get to saving the designer file, you can actually save it back into the gallery, and they sit in the custom area. And there are various other more complex graphs, but we'll probably stick with this one for the time being. Okay, Next, please. So you need to be aware that the ODS Graphics Designer is not part of SAS. It's called from SAS and then makes use of the resources that that SAS session has. Now, the reason I have to say that is if you want to build a template around an existing dataset, that dataset must already be accessible through a libname in your original SAS session. Otherwise, you'll just get SAS user, SAS help, and SAS work if you've done anything there, which generally you probably wouldn't have done. So you just need to be aware of that environment before you go in. So you need to make sure that you've got access to available libraries of data before entering. Thank you. Next slide. So let's go a bit more detail into the galleries. These are standard predefined graphs. Now in most cases I would suspect that you're going to be producing either line charts, bar charts, or maybe the box plots. If you click on one, and what I've done is I've clicked on the on one of the bars, it immediately comes up saying, what data do you want to use? And this is sample data. And so I've specified a good old faithful SAS help class, and then I'm producing a category which is age, and then I'm not putting any particular response in, so it will do a frequency by default unless I change the statistics that are down below. That's all you need to do. You click OK, and we'll go to the next slide, and it's already produced a graph. And you can then go in and change the style and graph layout by clicking on the graph properties. Next slide, please. The styles are all the available styles. Some of them are probably not acceptable to the FDA. What I've done actually is click the bottom one, which is SAS Web, which is a neutral one, and in fact is the default style. Okay, thank you. Right, now it's produced the code. You can change various information. You can click on the title and the footnote to change those. Indeed, you can click on the labels of the axes to change those as well, and it will just come up with a box you can type into. On the area that you're working in at the top, this is the graph window. There's also a gallery window, an elements window, and you'll finally see a code window as well. And if you click on the view menu option and click code, next slide please, it produces the template that you've just generated. The italic font does make it a little bit more difficult to read. The big issue with this is that it produces a standard template name, which for the most part is the same, although I understand in 9.3 they're actually going to give you the option to change it. But in the version here it says SG Design, so you will have to edit it at some point. But that program will run, and it, if you use SG Render with sashelp.class dataset, it will produce the graph that you've seen in the previous slide. Now, the other thing is, because I changed the width of the graph window that you were showing before, it had specified a size, and so the begin graph statement actually has design height and design width. So you need to be a little bit cautious of that. Maybe take it out when you're editing it. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Having done that, you can actually go back in and split the graph into, in this case, male and female. And whereas we were looking in the plot variables, which is the other tab, the panel variables is quite a useful one to pick. If you click on that, you have a choice of either a lattice, in other words a graph with common axes, or a data panel which has the grouping variable as the top label. And I've specified the sex as the column I want to use, and it says there's going to be 2 cells, which is relief that there aren't more. because it will fit nicely across. And then clicking OK will go back to the graph. Next slide, please. And you see it's just split the graph neatly, keeping the axes at the bottom the same. There are no females with age 16, and there is an empty space there. So you get exactly the same axes on both boxes. So you can see where the spaces are. Okay, and next please. And this is the graph code that is generated. Again, you notice the template's called SG Design. And it's using the data lattice in this case. Remember we specified lattice rather than panel in the previous one. Right, that was using a gallery, so we've already got a graph pretty much set up. If we want to go from scratch and actually produce something completely new, or maybe produce the same but do it ourselves, you have an option when you're doing a file of either from the graph gallery or a blank graph. And we'll do blank graph for a new template again. The blank graph, it produces exactly what it says it does. It produces a blank graph. And you can then drag elements from the left-hand side in. In this case, I'm putting a bar chart. Next slide. And we get the familiar data specification. And I'm specifying the same SAS help class, age as a category, statistics as frequency, which is default anyway. And then, OK, and next slide. What I want to do is to put in another row underneath. So we're going to produce another graph, but with the same axis. So we click on row, and it produces a little box underneath and squashes the other graph up into the top. You haven't had to do anything more than click. There's no resizing, although it's possible then to do a bit of resizing if you wish. And this time I've taken the scatter up in the top left-hand corner and dragged it in. Okay, next. And it's again asking for what the data should be. The key for any template, though, is you must have the same data set for all of the templates, which is why it's automatically populated SAS help class. I haven't specified that. And if you change it, you may find that the other graph will change too. This time, the scatter plot, I want to do age against height, so just dots. Now, having done that, we want to add titles and footnotes, but we want to put them outside of the graph itself. So by going again to the insert, we can insert title and footnote, and you see it's put panel title, panel footnote. We'll leave it like that, but you can click on those and actually change them if you so wish. And you see that the individual points that make up the bar chart are shown on the scatter plot, lined up. Okay, next slide please. And that's the code. Again, it's not that complicated, but you notice it's generated some dynamic statements. And this is one of the oddities. Because you've got two graphs with the same x-axis, it's kept height as a value. But because we've got two graphs which may or may not be using the same variable, you've got age and age 2 that are generated in there. You may want to have underscore x var and underscore y var there and just replace it throughout the code as appropriate. Okay, next please. Okay, we've created this template which is perfect for our needs, but we'd like to be able to save it for other people to use as a basic template. So what we can do is go to the graph window and do File, Save As, and one of the options is to save as a designer file. This is an SGD suffix, and you can put it wherever you want. There is another option which is Save to Gallery, and that will actually save the same template but into the Custom tab of that gallery collection. Okay, next slide please. Personally, I prefer to save the code. And you have to go to the code window and save from there, and it will then save a SAS program. And it's just save as, and then you can specify a SAS program name. Next slide please. Okay, It's a Java application which is separate from SAS. It runs next to it. You need to have the SAS session running, which does mean that if you're running on the PC, you need to have PC SAS. If you're running on Unix, you need to have Unix SAS. That's really the only restriction. You can't run it on PC with a Unix SAS. It became production in SAS 9.2 maintenance level 3, which you may or may not have installed. The templates are all called SG Design. The SAS code, however, is very, very robust. It will do exactly what it says it's going to do because it doesn't have any frills. And generally this is a very good starting point to learn about and experiment with ODS graphics templates, because you can try almost anything with that and you see it immediately, which has got to be worthwhile. Okay, thank you. And such as the code that I've used, the generated templates are actually in there as well. So I'm sure you don't want a file that just says %SG design in. I think you can probably type that yourself. And again, my contact details. And next slide. And a couple of books with some old-fashioned graphics in, as well as other features that I've looked into. The information on the ODS graphics designer will be in a new book, hopefully out at the end of the year, which will be about graphics templates. Okay, thank you very much.